Right now on the Daily Debrief, a triple murder at a Florida party.
Was Brandy El-Salhi your sister?
She was.
The sister of one of 3 victims takes the stand as the state rests its case. Also, the president of the Toronto Raptors may be facing a civil lawsuit. And a high court opinion raises questions about the work of a famous criminologist. Plus, celebrity attorney Jose Baez tries to dump movie mogul Harvey Weinstein as a client. The Daily Debrief recaps the day in court. It's Tuesday, June 18th.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Debrief. Glad to be with you this Tuesday evening. The state has rested its death penalty case against 2 defendants accused of showing up to a party with guns and masks and murdering 3 people. Christopher Vasata is now on trial. He is accused of murdering 20-year-old Kelly Doherty, 26-year-old Sean Henry, and 24-year-old Brandy El-Salhi. Police found Vasata collapsed on the road about a mile away from the shooting scene near his own car. They say he was carrying a glove, a magazine, and a bullet. Co-defendant Marcus Stewart is also charged in this case. Authorities theorize Vasata was accidentally shot during the attack, which is why Vasata and Stewart are accused of stealing a car. Vasata was too injured to walk back to his own vehicle a mile away. Gloves recovered from the stolen car contain DNA from both of these defendants. Vasata's blood is inside the car. Vasata's DNA also on a hoodie recovered from a culvert near where the stolen car was found. A detective who heard many details straight from Vasata himself took the stand today.
I asked him his name. He told me his name was Christopher Vasata. I asked him what happened to him. He said he was at his friend Charlie's house and he was sitting around a fire pit. He was shot from behind. He said at some point he felt himself being dragged away, and at some point he was dragged away and put into a car, and at some point he was dropped off. I asked him if he knew who shot him. He said he didn't see the shooter. I asked him if his friends were the ones that put him in the car and dropped him off, and he said he didn't know.
Did you ask him any other questions?
I didn't, because he was getting ready to go into surgery, so I had to cut it short.
The defendant not pointing the finger at himself there, but the defense seems to be trying to blame another person named Luke Kasukos as a possible attacker. Police said his cell phone records indicate he was home nearby during the shooting. Surveillance video also shows Kasukos coming and going from his own home when he claims he was there all night.
At 7:20 p.m., there are actually 3 individuals wearing dark clothing that are observed outside the residence.
Correct?
Okay. And you don't specifically see Mr. Kasukos leaving again that night.
You don't?
Okay. But in the morning, you see him coming back in.
Correct.
Okay. So that video surveillance does not corroborate his story that he was at home.
Right, I can't say whether he left or not.
A witness returned to the stand today after the defense successfully shut down questioning yesterday. The defense claimed it did not have access to crime lab swabs taken from guns and cartridges recovered in this case. The prosecution said it was sufficient to share information about the items, not the items themselves. Here are both sides of the argument and part of the judge's ruling.
I have never seen it, okay? And I asked them to retrieve the package. They came over. They said, we don't know where it is. We had this discussion at the bench.
I think what Ms. Ramsey is saying is, because we don't have the actual swabs here, that is a problem. And it's not a problem. There's no requirement that I admit the actual DNA swabs from anything.
You know, I got the best lawyers in town on this case, and these things happen, but I don't think there's a discovery violation. Furthermore, I think, Ms. Ramsey, and I know you're protecting your client's rights. I'm not so sure what more you're going to do with the packet if it's here, as opposed to not physically being present at this juncture. But in abundance of caution, I think your request is at this juncture is to pause the cross-examination. You hadn't even started yet, right? and then have her come back and see where we stand tomorrow.
Okay, well, tomorrow is today. That witness was back on the stand to sort that issue out. Here is the key questioning from the state, the defense, and again from the state.
Are these swabs from a rifle that you swabbed at the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office crime lab within the firearms unit?
Yes.
You told us about swabbing the frame and the receiver and the trigger guard, correct?
Yes.
When you were swabbing those areas, did you notice any blood on the assault rifle?
No, I did not.
You didn't look at the swabs under a microscope, though?
No, I do not. I just take the swabs and then submit them.
Right, so when you say that you didn't see any blood on the swabs or the rifle, it's because there wasn't visible blood that is far above the 50 cells required for DNA.
I did not see anything.
There's another sticker on here that says Bodie. What is that?
I don't know. That's not part of the PBSO lab, so I guess from when they sent it to Bodie, I don't know what that's from.
Bodie's a different DNA lab.
Yes.
Okay, and do you have any results about that?
No, I don't receive results.
Does Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office DNA lab, to your knowledge, test fired cartridges or casings?
Not to my knowledge.
That they don't?
They do not.
Do they sometimes send it out to see if somebody will do it?
Yes.
Another crime scene investigator testified that she was unable to identify the source of bullets which struck a fence and an air conditioner at that scene. She also talked about suspected blood which she sent to the crime lab. Here is cross-examination and then redirect by the state.
Is this the fence that if you climbed over it, the street is there, Mohawk?
Yes.
Throughout that fence area, did you see what you determined to be bullet holes?
Yes.
Throughout that fence, did you see defects such as this that's marked?
I did.
We talked earlier, a few days ago, about stanchions, or these yellow markers that you placed down there. Is that correct?
Yes.
And did you place some of these yellow markers to designate the area where you saw blood on that driveway pavement?
Yes.
And blood BLS, what's that stand for?
Blood-like substance.
And blood-like substance number 3, is that notated by the stanchion right here?
It is.
And is that the BLS number 3 at the crime scene that you took a swab of and submitted to the DNA lab?
Yes.
The first pictures that you were shown, those were pictures of defects in the fence that runs along the east side of the backyard of the 1105 Mohawk.
Correct.
And those would be, I guess, consistent with being struck by a projectile from a firearm.
Yes.
And you didn't recover any projectiles from those defects, correct?
I didn't. I don't think CSI Bryant did.
And obviously, you can't determine which firearm fired the projectile that struck that fence.
Correct.
And of course, you can't determine.
No DNA tests, no forensic analysis of what fired what there. So what's going on? The sister of victim, Brandy El-Salhi, took the stand for a brief moment to identify her sister's car. It was the state's final moment, and it could have been highly emotional, but it was not.
Was Brandy El-Salhi your sister?
She is. She was.
You recognize that as being her car, your sister's car?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
And both sides have agreed that the identity of the victims is established and stipulated to by the parties, so they don't have to call a witness to say that body belongs to that person. That's all been stipulated to. Does everybody understand? Okay. With that stipulation then being placed on the record, state?
State rests at this time.
State rests. The state's finished.
A surviving victim testified earlier in the case that the party where this shooting happened was infused with drugs, guns, and that it was rare for the defendant to park his car 1 mile away from the location.
Did you have any loud music going?
No,
Were you having a party back there?
no,
Were you expecting a bunch of people to come over?
no, it was a private gathering,
Just the 4 of y'all, correct?
yes.
Tell us then, after a few minutes, what happened.
When the shooting started, I fell backwards out of my chair. I saw 3 figures rapidly approaching from this direction, firing guns at the same time. And I fell backwards out of my chair from right here and turned and ran through this alley on the side of my house. And I continued hearing shots, and I jumped through. There's a wall of bushes right here separating my neighbor's front porch from my yard. I jumped through the bushes, I landed on my neighbor's porch, and I got up and yanked his door open and told him to call 911, that someone was shooting people in my yard.
Do you know how many people were there?
I believe I saw 3 figures.
What were they wearing, if you saw?
From what I saw, they were all wearing very dark clothes and their faces were covered.
So are you able to identify any of the shooters by face?
No.
Have you ever been able to identify any of the shooters by face?
No.
Prosecutors asked that surviving victim to be honest about what was going on at his premises.
It was illegal for you to have firearms, wasn't it?
Yes.
You'd been convicted of a felony prior to this, right? 2 felonies prior to this, correct?
Yes.
So those 2 felonies plus the 2 federal ones now, 4 times, right? 4-time
Yes.
convicted felon? All right. But that night, you knew you weren't supposed to have the firearms. Obviously, you weren't supposed to have the drugs, right?
Yes.
But did you yourself go to the police and tell them what happened in that house and tell them to go in there?
Yes.
And why is that?
I was worried about my friends' well-being. I didn't know if they were dying or dead yet. I thought that some of them could be saved.
As you were out there sitting on the ground, waiting for the rest of the police officers to come, did you begin to think about the trouble you were going to get into?
Yes. After talking to the officer and him not letting me go anywhere and him not going back there to help, I sat and replayed what had happened in my head, and I realized that I was going to go to prison.
And why is that?
I knew that I had a lot of guns and a lot of drugs in my house.
Okay. Knowing that you were going to go to prison, did you cooperate with the police anyway?
Yes.
An officer who responded to that scene overnight testified about finding the bodies and the alleged murder weapon.
And those individuals that you saw deceased out back, did you later learn that it was Sean, Kelly, and Brandy?
Yes.
You said you saw some shell casings out there.
Yes.
Okay. Did you see any blood-like substance on the concrete in the backyard, if you recall?
I did see blood. I just don't know if it was later in the day or at that moment.
Okay. You stated that you saw a pistol outside.
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall where it was that you saw that pistol?
It would have been towards the west side of the fire pit, so the easiest way to describe it is I walked into the backyard. The entrance to the backyard was on the west side of the house, so it was kind of like one of the first things I came across, kind of the closest thing to me.
Now, when you saw that, the Glock pistol.
Glock,
okay.
Yes.
When you saw that pistol, did you go over to it and make any observations?
Yes.
And what observations were you able to make?
I noticed it had an extended magazine in it. It also had what's known, it's a slang term known as a stovepipe, which is a jam in the gun, where a spent shell casing gets caught in the gun. It didn't actually fully eject.
Joining me now is former federal prosecutor Gene Rossi. So, Gene, good to see you again here on the Debrief.
Good to see you.
What's going on here with the swabs taken from the rifle, not tested by DNA, but then maybe tested by an outside lab?
Well, you know what? I had this same situation where we had a firearm, and the defense attorney thought that it wasn't properly swabbed, it wasn't properly examined for fingerprints. And what happened was the defense got a court order that allowed them to take that firearm, even though we had it, and have their own expert look at it. So I think what the defense is trying to do is say that the government did a sloppy job of analyzing every part of the firearms for blood, DNA, prints, hair fiber, whatever, and that they could do a better job. That, to me, is the punchline.
Okay, so in other words, there's a possibility of raising reasonable doubt here about that issue. What's going on with this Luke Katsukos, this other guy who the defense is trying to point the finger at? What do you make of that?
Okay, if you believe the alibi of Mr. Vasakis, and there were 3 people that invaded and did the shooting, then Luke Vasakis, the guy with the tattoos and the Batman outfit, he was the 3rd shooter. And he's really the guy that was killing everybody. And it wasn't the defendant.
Good defense or bad?
It's not a great defense, but it could raise reasonable doubt, yes.
Okay, well, certainly that's the defense's job. Gene Rossi, we're going to be back again with you at the end of the broadcast. Meantime, the sheriff's deputy who claims he was struck by the president of the Toronto Raptors now says he has a concussion and a jaw injury and is threatening to sue. Masai Ujiri is said to have pushed and hit a deputy as he tried to get on the court following last week's NBA title win. Police tell the local newspaper that the deputy was trying to keep Ujiri off the court because he did not have a credential, but witnesses say that's not the way it happened, and videos appear to show Ujiri with a credential in his hand. Still ahead tonight here on The Debrief, a former FBI agent who investigated the former governor of Missouri now finds himself in legal trouble over the way he is accused of handling the investigation. Plus, the famous Jose Baez asking a judge to release him from representing movie mogul Harvey Weinstein. Why the switch? The Debrief's analysis is after the break. An investigator who looked into whether the governor of Missouri took a photo of a sexual partner without permission is now himself in trouble with the law. William Tasabi is a former FBI agent who, at relevant times, was working for the St. Louis prosecutor's office. Tasabi is accused of perjury and tampering with evidence for allegedly lying about matters which could substantially affect or did substantially affect the course or outcome of the Greetons case. Governor Greetons admitted to having an affair with the woman and resigned as governor last summer. Testimony scheduled to resume today, and in fact has resumed, in the penalty phase of a California trial involving the murders of a family of 4. A jury convicted Chase Merritt of killing business associate Joseph McStay and McStay's family. This trial started in January and has dragged on for more than 5 months. The court scheduled only late testimony today. Here is a look back at how the state opened up this penalty phase of the trial.
The circumstances of the offense include the murder of an individual, Joe McStay.
And there, the boys are on the swings. Woo!
Who the defendant befriended. Summer McStay, who clearly took the brunt of the injuries when you heard testimony about her remains and how she was found with her jaw broken. The circumstances that include a mother's inability to protect her 2 children that were bludgeoned to death. The circumstances include the age and the innocence of Joe Jr. and Gianni McStay, 2 small children who were bludgeoned to death merely because they could identify the individual, the defendant.
Testimony in that case moves into this evening with testimony from family members. The man accused of tampering with evidence in the disappearance of his estranged wife wants his stuff back from the police. Fotis Doulos and his girlfriend Michelle Troconis are facing charges. Doulos wants 3 vehicles, 2 phones, several computers, a computer server, and several computer drives back so that he can mount a defense, court documents say. Wife Jennifer Doulos went missing May 24th amid a bitter custody dispute. The Connecticut Supreme Court is questioning the findings of Henry Lee, one of the nation's top criminologists. The court says Lee testified that a stain on a towel consistent with blood, but that subsequent tests revealed no DNA. The testimony was the key to convicting 2 men in 1989 of murder. The men will receive new trials. Henry Lee spoke out after the decision and said he did perform tests, but that they were preliminary. High-profile defense attorney Jose Baez wants to drop movie mogul Harvey Weinstein as a client. According to court documents, Baez says Weinstein's behavior makes this representation unreasonably difficult and that the two have fundamental disagreements. Baez was part of Weinstein's second legal team after an original lawyer also withdrew, and says Weinstein has hired a third lawyer, a third layer of attorneys who are threatening to sue Baez. Returning now is former federal prosecutor Gene Rossi. So Gene, you're in private practice now. How bad does a client have to be before a judge lets you out of the case right in the middle of the case?
Well, a judge will always grant a request to get a new counsel if there's such a deep personality disagreement between the client and the attorneys. I will say this. I am friends and I've taught with Professor Ron Sullivan, and he was with Jose Baez on the second layer of attorneys, and he got off the case. And now I understand that Jose Baez got off the case because the defendant got a third layer. That's a recipe for disaster. The judge is going to grant a motion, and then we may have a fourth layer. We don't know.
You know, the motion filed by Baez seems like it reads right straight out of the handbook for this. These are the magic words you have to say if you want to get out from representing a client. Does the judge just take them at face value, or does the judge have to dig into this a little bit and say, okay, wait a minute, what's going on here?
This is the beautiful part of when a lawyer asks to be taken off a case. There are wonderful code words, platitudes, nomenclature that they use, and a judge can pick up on them. It's almost like irreconcilable differences. And Jose Baez used the classic, appropriate code words to tell the judge, we can't represent him anymore.
Yeah, fundamental disagreements in there, and those are neither platitude nor nomenclature. Gene Rossi, thanks a lot for joining us on the Debrief. I have 2 new words I need to make sure I put in my repertoire. Look them up. We're glad you joined us on the Debrief as well. Our live trial coverage is going to continue at 9 o'clock in the morning. Testimony this evening in the McStay case is live on lawandcrime.com. Good night.